Hey everybody, and welcome to episode 5 of the Koop Scoop. Today we're going to be talking about the 1998 Major League Baseball season. So, the 98 baseball season will end with the New York Yankees sweeping the San Diego Padres in the World Series. The Yankees in total, they won 114 games during the season. If you include the postseason, they would finish with 125 wins in total, which to the state still remains an MLB record for most wins in one calendar month, or one calendar season, I should say. So also in 98, we have two new teams that added, the Arizona Diamondbacks and the Tampa Bay Devil Rays. The Devil Rays would later drop Devil, and now they just call the Tampa Bay Rays. So the Diamondbacks would go to the National League West, and the Devil Rays went to the American League East. Also, the Milwaukee Brewers would move from the American League Central to the National League Central as well, making it even. Now you have 16 teams in the NL and 14 in the American League. One of the biggest stories from that particular season was the single-season home run chase. At the time, Roger Maris held the record with 61 home runs. So, the season began with Mark McGwire of the Cardinals and Ken Griffey Jr. from the Mariners, who started on pace to try to break Roger Maris' single-season home run record. Griffey, however, would fall off. He would finish the season with 56 home runs. Sammy Sosa of the Cubs would join the home run chase that June. He ended up setting an MLB record for most home runs in 1 month with 20. McGwire would finish the season with 70, and Sammy Sosa would end up with 66. They both would break Roger Maris' record. Also, Greg Vaughn of the San Diego Padres would end up hitting 50 home runs that year as well, making it the first time in which you would have 4 guys with 50-plus home runs in a season. The defending world champion Florida Marlins that year would finish in last place in the National League East with the 54 and 108 record. They would be the first and only team that went from a win in the World Series one year to finish with 100 or more losses the following season, as well as last in the division. McGwire and Sosa, however, would later be accused of taking some kind of steroids, in which now many say the 98 season was tainted because that great home run chase between McGwire and Sosa now is considered to be tainted for steroids. So, Kerry Wood of the Cubs and Ben Grieve of the Athletics would go on to win the Rookie of the Year that year. Many say Kerry Wood, because of his 20 strikeout game against the Astros that year, is the reason he would win Rookie of the Year. There were also 5 people elected to the Baseball Hall of Fame that year. You had George Davis, Larry Doby, Lee McPhaley, Bullet Rogan, and Don Sutton, who all inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame that season. So attendance was skyrocketed that year because of that home run chase. Many feel the baseball was able to recover from the strike baseball had gone on a strike in 1981 and 1994. So one of the reasons why attendance went skyrocketing was that home run chase. Many say that the 98 season saved baseball from those 2 years that they had strikes. So some big events that happened in the 98 season. So Yankees general manager Bob Watson would resign his position, and he was replaced by Brian Cashman, who still holds the Yankees general manager position. Hall of Fame legendary broadcaster Harry Carey ended up passing away. I believe it was from cancer that season. So another big event that happened, the very first game that the Devil Rays would play in their franchise history, they lost to the Detroit Tigers 11-6. Wilson Alvarez was the pitcher for Tampa Bay. He took the loss. Hall of Famer Wade Boggs would hit the first home run in Rays history. He drove in 3 runs in that game. Also, the Arizona Diamondbacks would play their first ever franchise game. They lost 9-2 against the Colorado Rockies. Andy Bennett got tagged with the loss for the Diamondbacks. 2 rookies, Travis Lee, would hit the first home run in Diamondbacks history, followed by a home run by rookie Kareem Garcia would hit the second home run. Obviously, Diamondbacks lost. Vinny Castilla with the Rockies drove in 5 runs that game. One of the biggest or longest scoring opening day games in baseball history would occur on that day, on obviously March 31st, between the New York Mets and the Philadelphia Phillies. The game was scoreless going into the bottom of the 15th inning. Pinch hitter Alberto Castillo, who was a backup catcher for the Mets that season, delivered a pinch hit single with the bases loaded against Phillies closer Ricky Bottalico. Tampa Bay would win their first ever game. They would beat the Tigers 11-8. Longtime Brave Fred McGriff for the Rays in that game, or Terrys at the time. He had 4 RBIs with 3 hits in that game. Also, Rockies outfielder Ellis Burks would set a major league record. He hit a home run in Arizona. It would make his 33rd different city in which he would hit a home run in. Diamondbacks would win their first game on April 5th. Their first ever win in franchise history. They won 3-2 against the San Francisco Giants. Andy Bennis picked up the win for the Diamondbacks in that particular season as well. So, Ken Griffey Jr., mid-April, he would end up becoming the second youngest player to hit 300 career home runs. He was 28 years old and 143 days old at the time. Record still is held by Jimmy Fox, who was 27, 325 days old at the time when he hit his 300 career home run. Kind of an interesting event that happened was in early May. Mariners catcher Dan Wilson, who was not known for his speed, somehow would become the 7th catcher in Major League history to hit an inside-the-park grand slam in a game against the Detroit Tigers. He would become the first Mariners to ever hit an inside-the-park home run, but it was a grand slam. And it was the first inside-the-park home run since Mike Greenwell did it for the Red Sox in 1990. Another big story, we talked about it earlier, with Kerry Wood. In his second career start, and probably one of the greatest pitching performances ever, he would somehow strike out 20 Houston Astros in a 2-0 win. He gave up 1 hit in that game. He tied Roger Clemens for the most strikeouts in the game. He tied Roger Clemens, who did it twice. The only hit he would give up was an infield single to Astros shortstop Ricky Gutierrez in the 3rd. Then in his next start, he would win. He would have 13 strikeouts in his next start against Arizona in 7 innings. And it would be he would set the Major League record with 33 strikeouts in a combined 2 consecutive games. We also have a story that many people might not remember because it was kind of a brief stint, but in May 15th of that year, the Dodgers would send all-star catcher and future Hall of Famer Mike Piazza to the Florida Marlins, along with Todd Zeile. In return, the Dodgers acquired Gary Sheffield, Jim Eisenreich, both outfielders, I should say, catcher Charles Johnson, third baseman outfielder Bobby Bonilla, and a pitcher named Manuel Barros. About a week or so later, the Marlins would then go ahead and trade Piazza to the New York Mets in exchange for outfielder Preston Wilson and pitcher Ed Yarnell, along with a minor leaguer, which many can't figure why the Marlins would go after Mike Piazza to just trade him about a week or so later. Around mid-May as well, Yankees pitcher David Wells took the mound. He ended up throwing the 15th perfect game in Major League Baseball history in a 4-0 win against the Twins. He struck out 11. Bernie Williams that day had 3 hits, including a home run. After the game, David Wells said that he was dealing with a hangover and he pitched a perfect game on a hangover, which obviously David Wells was known for drinking. We also have that the very next day, Mike Blowers of the Oakland Athletics would hit for the Psycho against the Chicago White Sox. He became just the 2nd player in Oakland A's history to hit for the Psycho, which is kind of odd because the Athletics, in their franchise, they had a lot of great speedy guys and some good hitters, so it's kind of strange that Blowers would become just a 2nd player in that day to do so. That following day, Mark McGwire would hit 3 home runs in a game against the Phillies. It would be his 3rd 3-home run game of that season. We're only in May, so the season started in April, so it's already May. It would make his 3rd 3-home run game of the season. and he became the fastest player in baseball history to hit 20 home runs, and it's only in May of that as well. Another interesting situation was about a week or so later, the Indians decided to start David Bell. I don't know if he was playing third or second base. I forget what day, but he came up as a second baseman, so I believe he played second base that day. His father was the manager of the Detroit Tigers at that particular game, so he became just the second player in history to play against a team managed by his father. Then around early June, the Cincinnati Reds had retired Hall of Fame, one of the greatest second basemen in history, Joe Morgan. They retired his number in a pregame ceremony. We go to July. Roger Clemens from the Toronto Blue Jays. He gets his 3,000th career strikeout. He struck out Tampa Bay outfielder Randy Winn in that one. A few days later, the Baltimore Orioles retired Hall of Famer Eddie Murray's number, which many say was kind of overrated because a lot of people didn't really claim Eddie Murray should have had his number retired, but he ended up doing it. About 3 days later, Rockies outfielder Dante Bichette would become the first Rocky player to hit for the cycle in a 9-8 win. It was a kind of a dramatic win though. It was a 9-8 win in 10 innings. He had a 10th inning home run to put the Rockies up in front. That same day, Yankees outfielder Tim Raines would record his 800th career strikeout. 800th career stolen base, becoming the 5th player in history to have 800 stolen bases. We also have, about a week later, the Indians had retired pitcher Bob Lemon's uniform number. Obviously, the Indians would lose the game against the Yankees that year. In June, the last day of the month of June, Sammy Sosa would hit his 33rd home run of the season against Arizona. It was the reason why that's an incredible feat is because it was his 20th home run of the month of June, setting a record for most home runs in a single month. It was June in which Sammy Sosa was able to join in the home run chase with Mark McGwire, Ken Griffey Jr., and all those other guys. So that was the month that he capped by being able to join the home run chase. We go to the All-Star game. The American League won the All-Star game 13-8. This game was played in Coors Field in Denver. It was the highest scoring MLB All-Star game in history, in which the AL won 13-8. Orioles second baseman Roberto Alomar, who was still with Baltimore at the time, he would end up being the game's MVP. Went 3 for 4 with a home run and an RBI and scored a run, or 2 runs he scored. A few days after the All-Star game, Bud Selig was elected as the commissioner of baseball. He was voted in by all the owners at the time. A lot of people didn't really consider Bud Selig as a great commissioner because of the whole steroid scandal. That's kind of what Bud Selig was known for. He is in the Hall of Fame, though. He did get to the Hall of Fame eventually. Mid-July, Orioles first baseman Rafael Palmeiro, who would record his 300th career home run off the Angels. Now, Palmeiro was kind of, I don't know if anybody remembers this, but he was the first well-known star player to actually test positive for steroids. Obviously, when he tested positive for steroids, I think it was his final season. I think it was in 2002 or 2003. But it prevented him from being in a Hall of Fame. He could have been a Hall of Famer, but it didn't end up happening. So towards the end of July, Padres closer Trevor Hoffman was trying to set a record trying to get 42 consecutive straight saves dating back to the previous season. However, he blew the game when he gave up a 9th inning home run to Astros outfielder Moises Alou. Obviously, Hoffman would get to win because the Padres came back to win. However, Hoffman did not get his 42nd consecutive save. If he had picked up a save in that game, it would have set the MLB record for most consecutive saves. It didn't end up happening. The last day of July, a kind of a famous trade had occurred between the Houston Astros and Seattle Mariners. The Mariners would send their ace Randy Johnson to the Houston Astros in exchange for 3 minor league pitchers. Astros were looking for help in the starting rotation. They get Randy Johnson, who was in a contract year. However, Randy Johnson had probably an incredible run with the Astros from the time they got him till he hit free agency at the end of the season. In 11 regular season starts with the Astros, he combined with 10 wins and he had 1 loss. He had a 1.28 ERA, over 100 strikeouts in over 84 innings. He ended up pitching 4 shutouts with Houston during that time, and he would end up finishing 7th in the NL Cy Young Award despite only pitching 2 months with the Astros. Then around August, we have Dennis Martinez, who was pitching with the Atlanta Braves. He was, I think, 44, 45 years old at the time. He beat the San Francisco Giants it was his 244th career win, which would become the record for most wins by a Latin American pitcher. Juan Marshall held that record for a long, long time, but that day it was Martinez. He would get some help from teammate Chipper Jones, who had 4 hits with 4 RBIs in that game. So around mid-August, Baltimore Orioles designated hitter Harold Baines would pass Hal McRae for the most RBIs by a DH in history. He would get it against the Cleveland Indians. It was his 824th career RBI as a designated hitter to set the record. Harold Baines ended up joining the Indians a year later for the postseason run. Kind of another interesting thing is in August of that year, mid-August, catcher Chris Hoiles became the 9th player in history, but the first catcher to hit 2 grand slams in a single game. And it was kind of a blowout. I think he had 9 or 10 RBIs in that game for the Orioles. Towards the end of August, Barry Bonds, who I think should be in the Hall of Fame, but he's not, would end up he had his 400th career home run off a Marlins pitcher Kurt Ojala. Many say that had it not been for McGwire, Barry Bonds was kind of somebody in '98 who wasn't getting a lot of attention at the time. So whether or not he took steroids at some point, nobody really knows, but maybe it happens. Final day of August, Athletics outfielder Ricky Henderson would score his 2,000th career run. He would join Ty Cobb, Hank Aaron, Babe Ruth, Pete Rose, and Willie Mays as the only players in history to have 2,000 career runs scored. That same day, rookie pitcher of the Chicago Cubs, Kerry Wood, would throw 135 pitches in a game against the Cincinnati Reds. That next day, in September, Kerry Wood complained of a sore right elbow. But that particular game, that was his 9th game of the season in which Cubs manager Jim Riggleman would allow him to throw 120 or more pitches in a particular game. The Cubs had decided, since they were in postseason, they were in a pennant chase, they ended up winning the wild card that year. The front office basically felt it was best to have Kerry Wood sit for the rest of the season. He did return. He did pitch in the playoffs, but he did lose the playoff game. I forget who he pitched against, but it was kind of a sad story because Kerry Wood was supposed to be the next great Tom Seaver. He blew out his right elbow that following spring, and he was never the same pitcher afterwards. And many feel that because he had all those games pitched in '98 with 120 more pitches, that might have been the reason why he blew out his arm. In early September, the Yankees won their 100th game of the season against the Chicago White Sox 11-6. And when they won their 100th game of the season, it was 5 days quicker than the 1906 Cubs did in the 1954 Indians. And the Yankees, they also won 114 games that season. In September, the day after the Yankees won the 100th game, Mark McGwire would hit his 60th home run of the season. He would become just the 3rd player in history to hit 60 home runs or more in the season. He joined Babe Ruth and Roger Maris as the only other guys to do so. The following day, another guy who I think should be in the Hall of Fame is Braves center fielder Andrew Jones hit his 50th home run of the season, in which, against the New York Mets, he would become the 3rd youngest player to hit 50 home runs in a single season. He joined Mel Ott and Tony Conigliaro as the only players to hit 50 home runs at a young age. That following day in September 7th, Ken Griffey Jr. would hit his 50th home run of the season. So Griffey always is a Hall of Famer, and he should be. But he became the third player in history to hit 50 or more home runs in 2 consecutive seasons, joining Babe Ruth and Mark McGwire as the only other players to do so. The next day, Mark McGwire would break Roger Maris's single-season home run record when he hit his 62nd home run in the 4th inning of a game against the Cubs. He hit the home run off a Cubs pitcher, Steve Traxel. It was his shortest home run he hit all season long, which is kind of ironic because it was this record, single-season record that he would hit. Cubs outfielder Sammy Sosa also hit a home run that game. It was his 50th home run of the season. And the home run chase obviously continued all year long. J.D. Drew made his major league debut as a pinch hitter for the Cardinals. He came on the pinch hit in the 6th inning for Kent Mercker. On September 11th of '98, the Marlins will lose to the Braves 8-2, in which they would become the first World Championship team in history to lose 100 or more games the following season. In mid-September, Ken Griffey Jr. would hit his 52nd home run of the season, driving in his 1,000th career run, in which he became the 4th youngest player in history to do so. He joined Mel Ott, Jimmy Fox, and Lou Gehrig. The following day, Griffey would get his 20th stolen base of the season, becoming just the 3rd player in history to have 50 home runs and 20 steals in the same season, joining Willie Mays and Brady Anderson as the only other guys to do so. On September 16th, Mike Piazza, who's now with the Mets, he hit his 200 career home run off the Houston Astros that day, in which they never were able to record the ball for him. He wanted to keep the ball, but they could not get the ball. They couldn't find where it went off to. Denny Nagel from the Braves, he would go 15-11, in which it was the first time in which any team in history would have 4 pitchers with 15 or more wins in a single season. The Braves, who were destined to win the '98 World Series, didn't end up happening, but nothing anybody can do about it. A couple of days later, Alex Rodriguez of the Mariners would hit his 40th home run of the season, becoming the 3rd player to join the 40-40 club. For those who don't know what the 40-40 club is, it's when a player hits 40 home runs and steals 40 bases in a single season. So when Alex Rodriguez did so, he joined Jose Canseco and Barry Bonds as the only other 2 guys to do so. Around the end of September, Cal Ripken Jr. from the Orioles takes himself out of the lineup before a game against the Yankees, which would end his consecutive streak games played of 2,632 games. He was replaced by a guy named Ryan Miner. Miner would have 1 hit and 4 at-bats in that game, and obviously Ripken's consecutive game streak would come to an end on that particular day. The following day, Jason Kendall of the Pirates would steal his 26th base of the season to set a record for the most steals by a National League catcher in a single season. Jason Kendall is one of the fastest catchers to ever play the game. Whether or not he'll get in the Hall of Fame one day, nobody really knows, but could happen. Towards the end of September, Sammy Sosa would end up hitting both his 64th and 66th home runs in the same game against the Milwaukee Brewers, in which, however, the Brewers would come back to end up winning the game, and the Cubs obviously would go on to win the wild card later that season. So in late September, Red Sox closer Tom Gordon will get his 42nd consecutive save of the year, which would set a record for most saves most consecutive saves at once in a single season. So then we have in September 25th, Sammy Sosa would hit his. So this is kind of interesting. Sammy Sosa hit his 66th home run. He passed Mark McGwire for like a couple hours, but Mark McGwire. It was the first time he passed McGwire all year for the home run chase. A few hours later, Mark McGwire would then tie Sammy Sosa with. He would hit his 66th home run as well. So September 26th, Hall of Famer Dennis Eckersley, who is now back. He was back with the Red Sox. He would get a standing ovation because it was his last game he would pitch in his major league career. But the Red Sox ended up losing the game. They lost the game 5-2 against the Orioles. That same day, Cardinals first season Mark McGwire hit his 62nd and 60th home run against the Montreal Expos, in which he pulled ahead of Sammy Sosa for the home run chase. Now this is kind of an interesting one. So the next day, September 27th, the Reds defeat the Pirates 4-1. The Reds would use a pair of brothers in the infield. Brett Boone played second base. His brother Aaron would play third. Barry Larkin played shortstop, and his brother Steven would play first base. First time in which brothers would play infield in the same game. So that same day, Mark McGwire would hit 2 more home runs against the Montreal Expos for the second straight night to set the MLB record for 70 home runs in a single season. Sammy Sosa, who also played that same day, he failed to hit a home run, so he would end up finishing the season with 66 home runs. However, the Cubs loss and would force a one-game playoff for against the San Francisco Giants to determine the NL wild card. So it gave Sammy Sosa another opportunity to try to tie McGwire. That same day, and the same day, Greg Vaughn of the Padres would hit his 50th home run of the season. It was a career high for him, and also a new record for most home runs ever hit by a Padre in a single season. And like we said earlier, it was the first time in which Major League Baseball would have 4 guys with 50 or more home runs in a single season. So the guys were Ken Griffey Jr. had 56, Sammy Sosa was 66, and Mark McGwire with 70. Trevor Hoffman, also of the Padres, recorded his 53rd save of the season to tie an NL record for the most saves in a single season. Randy Myers set that record in '93 with the Cubs. That same day, the Yankees would win their 7th game of the season. They defeat Tampa Bay 8-3, in which they would set the American League record for 114 wins in a single season. That same day also, in his first ever Major League win, Roy Halladay of the Toronto Blue Jays, he was only a week into his Major League debut. He would have had a no-hitter, but it was broken up when Bobby Higginson of the Tigers hit a home run with 2 outs in the 9th inning. It was the only hit that he would allow. And it was also the 3rd time in history in which a no-hitter would be broken up in the final game of the regular season. So the next day, in the one-game playoff between the Chicago Cubs and San Francisco Giants, the Cubs would beat the Giants 5-3, which would give the Cubs the National League wild card. It was for the 3rd game in a row. Sammy Sosa gets 2 hits, but he did not get a home run, so that kept him at 66 home runs. And that's how Sosa would finish the season with 66 home runs. So now we go to the postseason. So the Cubs, they defeated the Atlanta Braves in the National League Division Series. The Yankees would go on to win the World Series. They swept the Padres, in which Scott Boras would be named World Series MVP. The Yankees would finish the season combined with their regular season and postseason with 125 wins, the most wins in a single season at all times. Tom Glavine of the Atlanta Braves would win the 2nd Cy Young Award. It was an extremely close vote between him and Trevor Hoffman and Kevin Brown. Glavine had received 11 first-place votes. Hoffman had 13. Brown received the remaining 8. But it was obviously Glavine ended up with 99 points to win the Cy Young Award. So you also know that when the season ended in November, that Hall of Famer Catfish Hunter was suffering from the Lou Gehrig's disease. I don't even know how you say Lou Gehrig's disease, but that's what ended up happening. Arizona Diamondbacks in November, the Diamondbacks would sign free agent Randy Johnson to a 4-year, $50 million contract. And in December of that year, the Dodgers would set the bar. They would sign free agent pitcher Kevin Brown to a 7-year, $105 million contract, largest contract in Major League Baseball history. So that was basically kind of a wrap of the '98 season. So now we're going to switch and go to the Major League Baseball postseason in 1998. So at this time, you had the 2 leagues. You had the American League and the National League. and you would have one wild card winner from each team. So each league was split up into 3 leagues. So you have the East, Central, and West. So whoever had the best record from each league or from each division would win the division, and whoever had the top wild card spot, usually the second place team would get the wild card. So the postseason, obviously the Florida Marlins were the defending world champions, but they didn't qualify for the postseason because they had a bad season in '98. So the Major League Baseball postseason in '98 will last from September 29th to October 21st. It would conclude with the Yankees winning their 24th World Championship. San Diego Padres, it was the second ever World Series appearance, and the semifinalists were the Cleveland Indians and the Atlanta Braves. So this was the Atlanta Braves. There was their 7th straight postseason appearance. All of them previously since 1990 have been divisional wins. So the Yankees and Indians will return to the postseason for the 4th year in a row, and the Boston Red Sox returned to the postseason for the 3rd time during the decade. Texas Rangers returned to the postseason for the 2nd time in 3 years, and the Houston Astros returned for the 2nd year in a row, making it the first time that both teams from Texas would make the postseason. The Chicago Cubs returned to the postseason for the first time since 1989, and the San Diego Padres were making their 2nd appearance in the past 3 years. So the playoffs began on September 29th, 1998. Obviously, it will end with the Yankees sweeping the Padres in the '98 World Series. And it was, like I said, it was the Yankees' 24th World Championship, which at the time tied the Montreal Canadiens for the most championships wins by a North American sports team. So the division champions, how they were succeeded was if you were seed 1 to 3, the wild cards will automatically seed number 4, regardless if they had a better record than the divisional winners. So typically how they figured out who was going to be what seed, the team with the better regular season record in the first 2 rounds had home field advantage, with the wild card never having home field advantage until they got to the World Series. So the division series would have the number 1 versus the number 4 seed, which is the wild card, and the number 2 seed faced number 3 team. Those are both division champions. However, if the number 1 seed and the wild card were in the same division, then obviously the number 1 would face the number 3 team because they didn't want to have the same division winner face the wild card, except for the championship series. So home field advantage in the World Series was still based on yearly rotations at the time, which was if you had the best record, you had home field advantage regardless. And obviously this was the first postseason in which the division series was conducted under a 2-2-1 format. So what that means is the first 2 games are played at whoever had the best record, then the next 2 at the other team's home field, and then the last game whoever had back at where the series began. So the highest seed obviously would host games 1 through 2 and game 5 if they needed to. Obviously lowest teams would host games 3 and 4. So the teams in the playoffs, you have the division clinchers in the American League. You have the Yankees who finished with 114 wins and 48 losses. They would win the American League East. Cleveland Indians would win 89 games. They lost 73. They would win the American League Central. And in the Texas Rangers, they would win 88 games and lose 74. They won the American League West. And the Boston Red Sox, they had the 2nd best record in the American League that year. They won 92 games and lost 70. But since the Red Sox and Yankees were in the same division, they didn't play each other in the division series. So instead, the Red Sox would play the Indians, and the Yankees would play the Rangers. In the National League, you would feature the Atlanta Braves, who win the National League East with a 106 and 56 record. Houston Astros would win the National League Central with a 102 and 60 record. San Diego Padres won the National League West with a 98 and 64 record, and the Cubs would obviously clinch the wild card with a 90 and 73 record. Obviously, but since the Cubs and Astros play in the same division, they didn't end up playing each other in the division round. So in the division series, So the Yankees would match up against the Texas Rangers. And this was a rematch of the 1996 American League Division Series. So in '98, the Yankees would sweep the Rangers, and it would be the second straight year in which it would be the second time in 3 years that the Yankees would go to the championship series. And then the Yankees and Rangers would meet again the following year, which also ended with the Yankee sweep. And it wouldn't be until 2010 that the Rangers would finally break through against the Yankees. So in that series, in the '98 series between the Yankees and the Rangers basically stood no shot. They scored 1 run in 3 games against the Yankees. That was kind of a tough series for the Rangers. The other division series was between the Cleveland Indians and Boston Red Sox, in which the Indians would go on to win the series 3-1. This was a rematch of the 1995 American League Division Series, in which the Indians defeated the Red Sox in that series to return the ALCS for the 3rd time in 4 years. So both teams would meet again in the 1999 American League Division Series, the 2007 ALCS, and then again in 2016 American League Division Series. Red Sox would obviously win the 2 of them. So in the National League, you got the Atlanta Braves, who matched up against the Chicago Cubs. The Braves would sweep the Cubs 3-0. So this was the 7th year in a row in which the Braves would go to the National League Championship Series. The Cubs, however, would not return to the postseason again until 2003. And then for the other National League Division Series, there's the Houston Astros versus San Diego Padres. The Padres would win the series 3-1, and this was the first time the Padres would go to the National League Championship Series since 1984. So in the American League Championship Series, it was between the New York Yankees and Cleveland Indians. The Yankees won the series 4-2. This was the rematch of the previous year's American League Division Series in which the Yankees defeated the Indians in 6 games. Indians and Yankees would meet again in the 2007 American League Division Series, in which the Indians would win, and in 2017 the Yankees would win the Division Series. So in the National League Championship Series, you had the Atlanta Braves and would play against the San Diego Padres. This is kind of one of the biggest upsets, probably in baseball history, probably in the last, say, 40 some odd years. So the Braves, who were destined to win the World Series in '98 because they had 4 guys with 15 wins. They have 4 guys with at least 30 or more home runs, and at least 4 guys with at least 100 or more RBIs. So they had probably the best team on record at the time. However, the Padres would end up beating the Braves to return to the World Series for the first time since 1984. And it wasn't until 2022, this was the last playoff series that the Padres would win until 2020. The Braves would return to the NLCS the following year in 1999. They would defeat the Mets to go to the World Series, but the Braves would lose the World Series in '99 that year as well. So the World Series in '98, it was kind of considered, many say, is one of the worst World Series ever played in history, in which you have the New York Yankees, who had the 114 regular season wins, going up against the San Diego Padres. The Yankees basically swept the Padres in 4 games, and it was the Yankees' second division World Championship in 3 years. So this was kind of in the middle of the Yankees dynasty in the late 90s, because the Yankees would go again. They would win the World Series in '99 and in 2000, and obviously the Padres would not return to the postseason again until 2005. So that's a wrap on the 1998 postseason. So now I want to go to kind of a fascinating topic that no one really talks about. It's the 1998 Major League Baseball trade deadline. So we know that '98 was considered the home run chase between Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa. It was also the last season of Seinfeld, and the Titanic movie won an Oscar for the best film of the year. I don't know, but the trade deadline in '98, there was a couple of major trades that happened that many can't figure out why they happened. So that's why I'm gonna just focus on the kind of the trades that nobody really talks much about. So one of the very first trades that would occur was in June 20th, 1998. The Red Sox would trade a minor league pitcher named Ethan Faggett, who I'd never heard of, and Jim Leyritz to the San Diego Padres in exchange for pitcher Carlos Reyes, catcher Mendy Romero, and pitcher Dario Veras. Of those three players that the Red Sox received, only Carlos Reyes provided much value as a middle reliever. Jim Leyritz, however, would go on to have another postseason tear in which he would hit 4 home runs in 35 plate appearances during the postseason that year. For those of you who don't know, that Jim Leyritz was kind of well known for his heroics in October. Another big trade that occurred at the trade deadline was the Cincinnati Reds were trying to go. They were falling out of contention. They traded at the time one of the top closers in baseball in Jeff Shaw to the Dodgers in exchange for first baseman outfielder Paul Konerko and pitcher Dennis Reyes. Reyes, who was he pitched quite a long time, he ended up doing quite well with the Reds. Jeff Shaw, however, he continued to be considered an elite closer with the Dodgers. He would go on to post a .255 earned run average and 25 saves after the deal. However, both the Reds and Dodgers weren't even close to the postseason in '98. For Paul Konerko, however, it was kind of a trade that got away because he was traded again that offseason to the Chicago White Sox in exchange for outfielder Mike Cameron, where Paul Konerko would then make a name for himself with the Chicago White Sox. Another trade which is kind of another interesting trade, the Texas Rangers were looking to try to improve upon their pitching staff, so they would go and they traded second baseman Warren Morris and pitcher Todd Van Poppel to the Pittsburgh Pirates in exchange for Esteban Loaiza. Loaiza was bad awful with the Texas Rangers. In 14 starts, he would go on to have a 5.90 ERA. The Rangers would make the playoffs, but they lost to the Yankees in the division series. Warren Morris, he would go on to have a good year with the Pirates in 1990, with being the regular second baseman and all, but he never really blossomed into the kind of player that the Pirates were hoping they were getting in return. Kind of another interesting trade that happened was the San Francisco Giants. They were trying to get to the postseason, so they had traded a minor league outfielder Darren Blood to the Baltimore Orioles in exchange for first baseman outfielder Joe Carter. Now, Joe Carter had gone in spring training in 1998 and said this would be his final season. So Carter would have a very good run with the Giants in the final 2 months of that season. He would go on to hit .295, and he would help the Giants get to that one-game playoffs that they lost to the Cubs for the wild card. Another weird kind of trade that no one to this day can figure out why this trade occurred. It kind of has baffled baseball historians for quite some time now. Was on July 31st, in the last trade of the deadline, the last day to make a move. The Diamondbacks should trade pitchers Willie Blair, catcher Jorge Fabregas, and cash to the New York Mets in exchange for pitcher Bernard Gilkey and outfielder and pitcher Nelson Figueroa. Like I said, nobody to this day can figure out why that trade occurred because neither player really had a great career in the major leagues. Willie Blair was terrible with the Mets. Jorge Fabregas played a total of 3 games with the Mets. Nelson Figueroa, who never blossomed into anything, kind of became a kind of a back end kind of pitcher. And Bernard Gilkey was released a year later, so after being acquired by the Diamondbacks. Another trade that happened on that same day was when the Giants traded outfielders Darrell Hamilton and pitcher Jim Stoops to the Colorado Rockies in exchange for Ellis Burks. Burks, who was a guy that had a high on-base percentage when he got to the Giants. Many people don't remember Ellis Burks with the Giants, but he was with the Giants before he became a full-time designated hitter. Another trade that stands out was when the Rangers, they made a 5-player deal with the Cardinals. They had acquired shortstop Royce Clayton, pitcher Todd Stoudemire, third baseman Fernando Tatis, pitcher Darren Oliver, and outfielder Mark Little. Stoudemire would go with the Rangers. He would have a 4.30 ERA. He pitched quite well in Game 1 against the Yankees in the Division Series, but obviously lost the game. Whereas Royce Clayton, he would go on to become a mainstay for the Rangers at shortstop. He had 14 home runs in 1999 and in 2000. And then Fernando Tatis, he kind of blossomed. In 99, he went on to hit 298 with 34 home runs. Kind of another big trade that happened was when the Astros, they acquired pitcher Randy Johnson in exchange for Freddie Garcia, John Halama, and Carlos Guillen. We talked about it earlier. Johnson was unhittable with the Astros, as he would go on to have a 1.28 ERA in 84 and a third innings, striking out over 116. But the Astros, they would end up losing to the Padres in the National League Division Series. Johnson did pitch well, though, in both of his postseason starts. For the guys the Mariners acquired, Freddie Garcia, John Halama, and Carlos Guillen, they all had productive careers, especially Garcia and Guillen. They all three kind of made the at least one-time All-Stars. Then Johnson, at the end of the season, he would go and sign with the Arizona Diamondbacks, and he would help the Diamondbacks to a World Championship in 2001. So, other things from the 98 season, kind of another story that no one talks about was when, we talked about it earlier, was when Mike Piazza was traded by the Dodgers to the Marlins. Piazza would go, I think he played in maybe 7 or 8 games with the Marlins. He didn't hit a single home run, but he did have a couple of runs batted in. The Marlins would then trade him to the Mets. And kind of that's when Piazza's career took off, was when he got to the Mets, because there was problems going into the 98 season. There was a contract dispute between Piazza was going into a free agent. The Dodgers weren't sure they could keep him. The Dodgers were kind of a team that was in the process of being sold, so they didn't really want to spend the money on an everyday catcher who was an offensive player. Piazza, who couldn't play first base, they just thought about moving Piazza to first base, but it didn't end up happening. So Piazza did want to stay in Los Angeles, but they couldn't get a deal worked in, so were able to move him to the Marlins. It's kind of funny, when he did his Hall of Fame speech, when he got inducted to the Hall of Fame, he talked about when he got traded to the Marlins, he knew he was going to get traded again. Now, when Jim Leland, who was with the Marlins, who was managing the Marlins at the time, when he heard his team had acquired Mike Piazza, he was all ecstatic. He was all happy and everything, because he just acquired an all-star player, only to end up getting traded a week later to the Mets. So Piazza, he would go on. He helped the Mets get to the World Series in 2000s, and then he helped baseball recover in 2000 after the attacks on 9/11. He helped baseball recover when he hit that home run. I think it was against the Braves. It was which the first responders were in attendance in that game. But another thing that gets kind of overlooked though in '98, because of it's now considered a steroid. It's overlooked by steroids. It's never really been proven as to whether or not McGwire and Sosa were on steroids. McGwire did say that he did use steroids in the 90s. He did come out a decade or so later. McGwire did come out a decade and did say he did use steroids during that season. Sammy Sosa, to this day, has said he never used steroids at all in his playing career. But because of the steroid that's linked to McGwire and Sosa, this kind of prevented them from being Hall of Fame players, which I think they should be in the Hall of Fame, but they're not. What else is there? For Greg Vaughn, he's kind of lost in that 98 season because he hit 50 home runs. He was traded that offseason to, I think it was the Cincinnati Reds. I believe. he didn't want to go to Cincinnati because he had the facial hair, and at the time the Reds did not allow players to have facial hair. And Marge Scott was the owner of the Reds at the time, and she did not want to have no players could have facial hair, so Greg Vaughn had to kind of, I think there was like a dispute between him and her. I think she allowed Greg Vaughn to keep the facial hair, but he was gone after the 99 season. Greg Vaughn was shipped to Tampa Bay, which I think he played until 2001. For the Diamondbacks, their first year, like I said, was in 1998. They would go on to make the playoffs that following season. They ended up winning the World Series in 2001. It took a long time to get Tampa Bay to get into the postseason. They did get to the World Series eventually, but they lost to the Phillies in the 2008 season. The Yankees in '99, the Yankees that following year in '99, after they set the 100, after they won the setting the record for most wins. Going into 1999, the Yankees acquired Cy Young winner Roger Clemens from the Blue Jays. They would trade David Wells. They had problems with David Wells. That season, David Wells wanted to stay with the Yankees, but George Steinbrenner wanted a better pitcher, so he goes after Roger Clemens. I forget who he had traded for him at that time, but it did kind of end up happening. Let's see. So let's see. For I wanted to talk about, where was it? If you talk about some of the award winners from the 1998 season, I have to find where it is. I know it was in here somewhere. Oh, here it is. So the award winners from '98, we talked about it earlier. For the for the Rookie of the Year, it was Kerry Wood from the Cubs and Ben Green from the Athletics. Tom Glavine and Roger Clemens were Cy Young Award winners in '98. Larry Durker and Joe Torre were the managers of the year. MVPs that year were Sammy Sosa and Juan Gonzalez. So we have for Gold Glove winners, the pitchers were Greg Maddux and Mike Mussina. For catchers, it was Charles Johnson and Ivan Rodriguez. First basemen were J.T. Snow and Rafael Palmeiro. Brett Boone and Roberto Alomar with second base. For third base was Scott Rowland and Robin Ventura. For shortstops, it was Ray Ordonez and Omar Vizquel. Probably the two best defensive shortstops at that time anyway. For the outfielders that won the Gold Gloves that year, there was Barry Bonds, Larry Walker, and Andrew Jones. In the American League was Bernie Williams, Jim Edmonds, and Ken Griffey Jr. For Silver Slugger Awards, it was Tom Glavine and Jose Canseco, Mike Piazza, Ivan Rodriguez, Mark McGuire and Rafael Palmeiro, Craig Biggio and Damian Easley, Vinny Castilla and Dean Palmer, and Barry Larkin and Alex Rodriguez, Moises Alou, Albert Bell, Sammy Sosa, Juan Gonzalez, Greg Vaughn, and Ken Griffey Jr. were all Silver Sluggers that year. For the American League statistical leaders, Bernie Williams would win the batting title with a .339 average. Ken Griffey Jr. led the American League with 56 home runs. Juan Gonzalez would end up having 157 RBIs. Now, many felt Juan Gonzalez could have about 200, but he kind of struggled. So we're just about to wrap things up. So we'll do it very quickly. For wins leaders, we have three guys in the American League win 20 games that year, with Roger Clemens, David Cohn, and Rick Helen. The stolen base leaders, Ricky Henderson led the American League with 66 steals, and Tony Womack at 58. So I want to wrap up this edition of episode 5, the Coop Scoop. We basically talked about the 1998 baseball season. So I want to thank you everybody for joining me today, and hope you have a great evening.